All right, welcome to the last lesson for the week. Week three, Hrad 223 part-timers. My name is Chris, as you know by now, and we are just going to close up what it looks like just for this, again, just for this week in terms of how we are chatting about the distribution technology 7.10, maintenance and security 7.11, and the summary for chapter 7. You can go find that in the Next Level Radio book by Nash and Cullinan. So, when we're talking about, or just a bit of an overview of this particular chapter, we're going to watch a couple of videos that are going to explain exactly what AM and FM frequencies are and how they work, and how a station actually works as well. How does a station receive those transmissions? And then we'll also look at DAB and the I said the insights around DAB technology, digital audio broadcasting technology, and what it is important, or what is important, should I say, to what you have to actually know moving forward. All right, so let's just remember that you can contact me on WhatsApp should you need any questions or you have any questions. And again, remember, this is online teaching for this week, as you are here and you do realize that's true. But next week end, I shall see you for week four's lesson in class at room 7, right? Room 7 on the main campus. All right, let's get into the lesson. I'm not going to run the slide, as you know by now. I just moved through the slides on the side here. You can see perfectly. And once again, if there are any questions about the lessons or the theory or the practicals that you do have, then please just reach out and let me know. Okay, so distribution technology, two types. We know AM and FM frequencies. Not a lot of us remember, including myself, often forget what AM and FM actually stands for. Amplitude modulation is where AM it comes from, and frequency modulation is the term for FM, right? What is the difference between these two particular frequencies, right? So AM signal will comprise of sound waves that can travel extensively, should I say, across the surface of the Earth and are carried by the Earth and the atmosphere. Now, these are, however, very noisy and they can be greatly affected by atmospheric conditions, rain, clouds, lightning. If you've ever listened to an AM frequency, you'll know that you'll note, should I say, there's actually quite a dull, kind of like a dull overlay over ours in particular here in South Africa. The ones that I've listened to specifically, and I've listened to a couple. I've just gone, I've just moved through, should I say, the AM frequency line um, just to explore, and FM frequencies are much clearer, right? As we know, again, with our own landscape, FM signal is much clearer and less affected by the atmospheric conditions, as the waves will now travel in straight lines, right? So this means that they will travel until the curvature, right, the act of curving. So we have those little ups and downs you'll see in the graphs. I'm sure when I said AM and FM and the graphical representations, you got a bit of an little bit of an idea. Oh no, wait, I know exactly what that looks like, right, graphically. So this means that it prevents them from traveling further beyond the horizon, right? So we're looking at more, uh, particularly national, regional, that type of stuff as well. Okay, all right. When we think about, let's say, radio in particular, I'm going to look at the graphing for it, right? Just the graphing, so you can actually see the differences between the AM and the FM frequencies, and then I want to go to a video, short introduction video that you're gonna have someone else who really knows, like, technically how to explain it a little bit better than I can. But the wave frequency, if you can see there for our amplitude right there, surface of the level, and we can see it goes up and down, goes obviously as a why it's called a wave, right? So wave frequency. Wave repetition, you can see that on page 280 as well. It's called frequency. So you can see that. And you learned kind of graphing that goes like this in maths. and so we can see how well maths and science is important to our lives, right? Okay, so an FM frequency signal travels and it's down, right? So this is how many times in a specific time frame the wave repeats itself, and that you can remember from science and maths, right? So, if we go, excuse me, I want to go a little bit further there. Just jump back there for a second. Distribution technology, right? For people to hear sound, there needs to be a force that starts with these particular waves traveling. So in radio, the force is a transmitter that we use, and we've discussed just in terms of like the equipment, and you've obviously heard the word transmitter. When we mentioned earlier in previous lessons, like Centec is one of the companies that run our transmitters here in South Africa. And the transmitter uses electricity, obviously, like a power outage, measured in watts, to send audio waves out so that they can be picked up by people's radio sets, right? And then decoded the waves, and they decode the waves into sound that we can actually hear. So there was again that codec. Remember the codecs that sit on either side of the trans of the actual, I say, broadcast itself, and the codec in to the obviously waveform, right? Okay, and then out back into, or should I say, in back into our radio sets, right? So the footprint of a radio station, how far and what areas of a radio station that can actually send its own radio waves to the listeners out there is determined by a number of transmitters that it does actually have, as well as by the output capabilities of that transmitter. So, for example, smaller community stations will have smaller transmitters, once again in line with the ICASA's license agreements as well, in terms of the footprint that they can actually or are allowed to actually transmit to. Yes, we do have stations that transmit further. So, for example, again, I'll use 919 as an example. So we're a Lovo-based Joburg station, right? That's yes, we're set in Lovo. I'm saying the station set in Lovo, transmitter not too far off there. But we are supposed to, according to the license, I haven't read through the license, but I'm just going to do a hypothetical here. Let's say we have a 10-kilometer radius, right? That's the footprint is allowed to transmit to, right? So as licensed by ICASA. But 10 kilometers, the other day I was having a conversation with the station manager. We're talking about sales and how to approach certain clients specifically to see whether our feeder area does actually um, extend to certain parts of Pretoria. So, for example, out in Centurion, you can catch 919, but I'm not going to say it's very clear. I was actually explaining to her, because I drive from Joburg to Pretoria. Obviously, I live in Pretoria here, you get that. So I will drive. I make the drive. I go and I test, let's say, station frequencies to see like how far can I actually reach just a normal, obviously normal radio. I don't own a DAB, and again, it's very obvious to say, which is what I said too. I said obviously in the ebbs and flows of the N1 highway, you completely lose the station around. I think it's the Brockfontein interchange, right? The one that actually allows you to go from the Midrand area to the Centurion area. You can obviously go the other side, which I think leads you off to, well, I mean, like Diepsloot and stuff. Right. But anyway, at that interchange, there's basically no transmission. It doesn't matter whether you can kind of hear the station; it's completely with white noise and noise surrounding it. So, in consideration to the footprint, yes, I mean if you're reaching out to maybe in the Bacloons change for sure, large parts of Midrand, you'll be able to hear the station. And so, just with that one example, you can understand that also other stations as well, so even our stations like 947 here where I stay, which is in Montana, I sit on the other side. So the other side, wherever side you stay on now, I'm saying you will stay, I'm guessing in Joburg predominantly. All right, I stay on the other side of the Magaliesberg mountain range, right? The mountain range cuts off 947 completely. You can't listen to anything. Even its commercial station, it's got obviously quite strong transmission, right? Okay, um, and a large, I say, so in terms of the watts, much larger because, again, the license obviously agrees to it, or it's an agreement with that. You can't hear it from the ad. That's really cuts it off. You'll hear it very, very unpleasantly so. Where other, I mean, if, for example, radio here in terms of commercial, we're looking at Jacaranda. Jacaranda also struggles to get past the Magaliesberg uh, mountain range again because it's a big obstruction. So just kind of give you a visual of how FM frequencies, those in particular, right, that I just mentioned with the three stations, might actually work. So, as I said, I mentioned the word radius before. The transmitter height might be of 10 meters. Again, kind of think of that N1 that goes up and down, right? Which is why we have that loss in transmission as well. And then the signal radius that is allowed again by that particular license agreement with the transmitter, right? A signal radius of 1 kilometer. What is the radius? Remember, the radius is let's say we have a center over here. It's the circle, right? To put it in layman's terms. Right. So then we have other stations, right? Higher, bigger, stronger, with a transmitter height of 100 meters, signal radius of, let's say, 10 kilometers there, right? Excuse me over there. And I'm going to just switch on over to a video for the moment with the development of stereophonic sound. So again, in stereo, which greatly enhances the listening experience and quality of signal, it has become the industry standard in broadcast to actually use FM broadcasting. We had a long discussion about AM frequencies and a lot of the stations there that could be really great. I mean, they are, I say, in their own capacity, a lot of them are quite great, community based, obviously, right? And I would say also, I would say culturally based specifically as well, cultural community, and then I would say to maybe or two. I wouldn't say with confidence might be also falling under the psychographic as opposed to demographic, right? Anyway, there are several AM radio stations or signal radio stations in South Africa, and these AM radio stations are mostly talk radio stations. I'm going to just stop there for the moment. So let me just stop the share here. Excuse me for my throat there. So I'm going to go here. Let's look at the first one, first little video. Oh, and make it bigger. And let's watch this dude.
Maybe it's just because I'm old, but even though Spotify, podcasts, and other forms of audio streaming seem to rule the day, there's just something comforting about the simplicity of turning a knob on the radio and listening to what's happening on the airwaves. Even in the digital age, radio has maintained a fair amount of popularity since the first public broadcasts in the early 20th century. But since radio has been around since long before we had things like digital decoders that turn electrical impulses into music, how the heck do simple, cheap radios know how to convert an electromagnetic radio signal into I don't know, let's say a basketball game or a weather report or Justin Bieber's greatest, who put that crap in my script? Anyway. AM radio broadcasts showed up before FM, so we'll start with those. An AM station will broadcast a signal at a constant frequency, but will add the sound wave representing the actual audio to that base signal. It's also called a carrier wave, resulting in the height or amplitude of the wave changing accordingly. This is where the term AM comes from, as it stands for amplitude modulation. You can get your radio to play back this signal as actual music or dialogue by tuning it to whatever frequency the station that you're looking for broadcasts at. This makes your antenna resonate at the frequency and ignore everything else in the air. So very simple radio tuners are actually little more than coils of wire. How many turns of the wire will determine what frequency you're picking up. Cool, right? The antenna actually creates an electrical current that corresponds to the radio signal. This current is sent to other parts of your radio that filter out the irrelevant parts of the signal and send it to your speakers or your headphones as changes in voltage, which drive those speakers and produce sound. It's actually pretty remarkable that this is all done without any digital decoding by something like a CPU. It's a completely analog process that made it possible for news, music, and entertainment to stream into homes decades before the internet or even TV. FM broadcasting works somewhat similarly, though with FM, it's the frequency of the signal that gets changed, hence the F in FM. FM radios have a special transformer inside them that basically sits idle as long as exactly whatever frequency you're tuned to hits your antenna. But once it detects a small change in that frequency, it outputs a voltage that makes your speakers emit a certain sound. So let's say you're tuned to 99.5 FM on your dial. Since FM works by using very small changes in frequency to carry a signal, you are actually tuned to signals just above and below 99.5 megahertz, which makes that transformer send the voltage to your speakers. Now, although this process makes FM more complicated to engineer than AM, you often get a much clearer, higher quality signal. FM is less susceptible to interference as well, because interference often manifests as amplitude spikes. An AM radio would see these spikes as actual sound to produce, and it would end up coming out of your speakers, while FM cares about variations in frequency rather than amplitude. So an FM radio can just ignore that type of interference, and the death metal you're listening to will come out sounding just as clear and angry as ever. FM also has the advantage of having much higher bandwidth than AM due to the mathematical properties of frequency modulation. This allows for lots of wiggle room in the signal to create more sounds more accurately, making FM the clear choice for music, while AM is often just fine for stuff where high fidelity isn't a big deal, such as talk radio. But if FM is so superior, then why do AM stations seem to have so much better range? Well, it's because AM wavelengths are much longer, meaning that they can move more effectively following even the curvature of the Earth and deal with obstacles like buildings, whereas you can quickly lose high-frequency FM signals if you start putting stuff in the way. AM frequencies also allow signals to cause free electrons in the ionosphere to oscillate at the same frequency as the radio wave that hits them, meaning that AM signals can actually reflect off the upper atmosphere. At night, there are more free electrons hanging out in the sky, which is why you can sometimes hear AM stations from hundreds of miles away after the sun goes down, as opposed to FM, which tends to go right through the atmosphere. Of course, this may not seem impressive when the internet allows you to listen to high-quality digital broadcasts from the other side of the world, no problem, but good old analog radio still has the distinct advantage of only requiring a $10 receiver with no subscription fees and very high ease of use, especially for people who might not be terribly tech-savvy. And of course, your radio will keep working even if your finicky internet connection goes out. Sometimes simpler is indeed better. Speaking of keeping things simple, FreshBooks. FreshBooks is the cloud-based accounting solution that helps you small...
Okay, and before he gets into his promotional pitch there, so that's quite cool. It explains it perfectly, and I'm sure you understood every single part of that. So particularly why I chose the dude over here sitting here telling us about that. Okay. All right, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to hop on back to, just give me a second, just want this.
You're a web designer?
Come on. Yeah.
In the modern era.
Right, okay. So we'll come back to this particular one in just a second. And I just want to move back to the lesson for a second. Right. Okay. Let's go back to, like I said, lesson 10. We are here. Excuse me. Right. And we'll just look at just a couple more slides before we get to DAB. And then I want to, again, move on to how radio actually gets its frequencies, even though you know them. I mean, there was the explanation of, inclusion of television, etc. But again, just for us to understand, man, uh, what a great, how great, man, I love science, engineering, whatever it may be, right? For us to figure that out back in the early 1920s, super cool. Again, just to understand that our say our medium and its I say its foundation in terms of the actual hardware side of stuff, right? It's got to run some cool sciencey, facts around there. Okay. Anyway, so with the development of stereophonic sound, as we said there, you can enhance that listening experience. Sure, as explained also in the video, obviously most of our AM stations are set just for talk radio stations, right? If we can if you kind of want to verify that to some extent, we can think about 702. 702 was on AM for so many years talk station, and it was then granted a commercial license. I'd say quite late in life. So I think it was in the 2000s, right, where FM was allowed, FM frequency was allowed for 702, and they moved on over. Right. Okay. Anyway, so the use of radio waves as a method for transferring sound can become quite, excuse the English there, quite complicated. And radio waves can only bend so much, which means that there's a limit to the spectrum of the waves that we can actually use, as you remember in the video, right? So as a result, there's a limitation on the number of radio stations that can actually use that particular available spectrum of airwaves. So let's assume, for example, we're looking at the FM spectrum, right? And why can't we just keep licensing more and more and more stations? I mean, why not, right? But there is a limitation to how many stations can be on FM. And we have got a number again. You must think of all the amounts of community stations, plus also, again, our a commercial RPBS, whatever it is, that are sitting on FM. Yes, a lot of the community stations do occupy AM, right? But not in comparison. The ratio between the two is obviously more with FM is the AM, right? And one of the roles that ICASA is to manage and assist or assign the airwave space to specific radio license holders so that they can broadcast using the FM signal, right? Predominantly. So have a look at, let's say, this little graphic that you can find in your textbooks, table 7.2. So a very low frequency signal is about less than 30 kilohertz. It's submarine communication with a low frequency signal, 30 to 300K, is aeronautical and maritime communication, right? MF, so medium frequencies, we're looking at 300 to 3000 amateur and distress signals, high frequency signals, so 3 megahertz to 13 megahertz, citizens band radio, fax and international communication, we got very high frequencies, VHF. I'm sure you've seen or recognized some of these particular acronyms, right? So 30 megahertz to 300 megahertz, FM and TV communication, UHF, so ultra high frequency signals, 300 to 3000 megahertz, digital TV, satellite TV radio, digital audio broadcasting, and mobile communications. Moving a whole lot up here to satellite radio, satellite, just point blank. Let me not include confusion here. Radar, space, and mobile communication, 3 gigahertz to 30 gigahertz, super high frequencies and then extreme high frequency signals. We know we were going, yeah, man, we're going out of space weather predictors, astronomy, and weather predictors, 30 gigahertz to 300 gigahertz. Crazy. Okay. Before we move into digital audio broadcasting, I do have another video for you so that you can enjoy. Here we go to sharing sound there. Give me a second. Let's go to how radio actually works. Let's put this up here and let's watch.
Radio waves control everything. From the tunes in your car driving down the road to the police radio in the car that's pulling you over for not signaling your turn. These waves are undetectable and invisible to human senses, but they make up the foundation of modern connected technology. While the root of modern connected technologies may be radio waves, the underlying tech that makes radio waves possible is a rather simple concept to understand. Any person can make a simple radio in their home for a few bucks, which is part of the reason this foundational communication tech dates back to 1895. As a demonstrable introduction to understanding what radio is, we'll engage in a simple explanation of how you might make one. All you need is a battery, a coin, and an AM radio. Tune the radio to a static channel and start tapping that coin on the two terminals of the battery. You'll start hearing that tapping through the AM radio. By doing this, you'll have made a crude radio transmitter, capable of communicating in Morse code or random taps, over just a few inches though. What you're doing in this process is exciting electrons on the transmitter side, the battery and the coin, which then is received as a signal on the receiving side, the AM radio, and turned back into an audio output. What you're doing is completing a circuit between the battery terminals, which creates an electromagnetic force, which can be detected by the receiver in the AM radio. In order to understand radios in more detail than what we've just discussed, we need to take a little trip through history. Back in the early days of radio technology, in the whereabouts of the early 1900s, radio transmitters were referred to as spark coils. This was due to the fact that they create large high-voltage sparks, upwards of 20 kilovolts, to send out a signal. The issue was, the message was sent out on all frequencies in the radio spectrum, meaning that there was essentially only one localized channel. This was fine and dandy back in the days where no one was really using radio, but nowadays, do something like this and you'll get fined or sent to prison. These early spark coils were essentially doing the same thing as the coin and battery experiment, except at a much larger scale, meaning that they had a lot higher range. Riding the magic school bus back to the modern era, and today's radios use sine waves to transmit all sorts of information, from audio to video to raw data. By utilizing sine waves for transmission, radios and devices can distinguish different channels based on frequency, or the number of cycles in the sine wave per second. This allows tens to hundreds to thousands of channels on modern radios, all in the same space without too much interference. Every single radio has two parts, a transmitter and a receiver. The transmitter is responsible for taking a string of data and encoding it to a sine wave. After that encoding happens, it can also be amplified and sent out across the air. The receiver, rather expectedly, receives the radio waves and decodes the message encoded into the sine wave. Each side of the system uses antennas to radiate and or receive the signal. Relating radios back to your life a little bit, chances are you're watching this video as a result of a transmission of radio waves. Cell phones use radios in their most basic form. They contain both transmitters and receivers and can run both at the same time. In general, phones use frequency modulation, or FM, in a frequency range of 800 megahertz, in any one of 1600 individual frequencies. All of those numbers and data probably is meaningless to you right now, but hang on as we dive deeper. Back to our simple battery demonstration. We can recall that an electromagnetic force was created when the battery circuit was completed. Modern radios build off of this idea by creating rapidly changing electric currents on the transmitter side. One of the best way of doing this is by utilizing sine waves, as we discussed. To create a sine wave, radios use capacitors and inductors to vary the current and voltage in a controlled means. Transistors are used to amplify the signal so that it has a further range. The problem though, as you might have picked up, is that sine waves don't natively carry any information. They provide a foundation for transmitting information. Like the Oreo cookie is the transmitter for that delicious filling. Or like crackers are the foundations to that dry-aged Gouda. You get the point. In order to get sine waves to actually carry information, you need to modulate it. You can do this in three ways: pulse modulation, amplitude modulation, and frequency modulation. Pulse modulation means that you turn the sine wave on and off, just like the IT guy suggested. Doing this allows you to easily send Morse code, but that's just about it. Pulse modulation is rarely used except to control clocks across the US. The simplicity of pulse modulation also allows one pulse modulator to cover massive areas, like the entire US. Amplitude modulation, on the other hand, is what is utilized by AM radio stations and TV signals to encode data. In this format, the amplitude, or peak-to-peak voltage, of the wave is changed. You can imagine this as the wave from a person's voice being combined with a sine wave to create a new, rather complex sine wave with the same frequency, but with a lot more data inside. Finally, frequency modulation, otherwise known as FM, is used for FM radio and tons of other wireless tech. In this encoding technique, the sine wave frequency changes slightly based on the signal. This means that the distance between the peaks of the waves is varied based on the data that's trying to be transmitted. Bringing all of these different techniques back into the real world, we can begin to understand them a little further. If you sit in your car and tune your radio to AM 680, that means that the transmitting station was operating at 680,000 Hz, meaning that the sine wave repeats 680,000 times per second. The voice of the speaker or the music on the transmitting side is modulated onto that wave through amplitude modulation. Then, the signal is amplified up to 50,000 watts for larger AM radio stations and then sent into space utilizing the antenna. Your car's radio picks up that signal, utilizing its own antenna. This can be as simple as a wire or a metal stick. In conjunction with the tuner on your radio tuning to the specific frequency, the tuner starts resonating at 680 kilohertz. Called resonance, this principle allows the radio to essentially ignore any other signals in the air. The signal then passes to the detector, or demodulator, that takes the voice or music from the wave, utilizing a device called a diode, and translates it back into audio. The final step in the process is for the radio to amplify the signal so you can hear it and change the volume as needed. FM radios have different detector setups and translate frequency into sound rather than amplitude, but otherwise they operate in the same way. Data can be encoded onto a constantly changing signal utilizing different modulation techniques that have advantages and disadvantages to each method. Nearly everything that communicates wirelessly around us uses radio waves to do so, and creating your own simple radio is actually a very manageable task. Over the last century, radio has radically changed the course of humanity and rapidly accelerated the growth of the information age.
Hey, what's going on here? A little bit of Morse code there. Technology, ain't it fun? All right, I'm going to just kind of stop that there. That could be, we don't really want to know what they're saying there. I'm going to stop that there. Cool. I hope you found that interesting. I find it quite cool to always, again, just learn a little bit more about this stuff. I mean, you remember what we said? I think we said in previous lessons. We said it last year sometime. We said just know a little bit about everything and read about everything, watch a bit about everything, type of thing, right? Okay, let's look at digital audio broadcasting, DAB. So, digital audio broadcasting seeks to do away with FM and AM frequencies. Why? Because we want to be able to have a nice, clear digital transmission for all our radio stations, right? When you listen to the radio station, if you do have a DAB receiver, you're going to receive this nice CD quality transmission from your station that you choose to listen to, right? Obviously, that will come with its pros and its cons, and its quote unquote obstacles and setbacks, right, that we might have here in South Africa. So there is a trial that ICASA is currently running. It's been running since I think about 2018 or so, to test the technology called digital audio broadcasting, right? Where technology converts the broadcast signal in radio waves into a digital signal, which then saves space on the limited frequency spectrum, which we have just seen in the video, maybe a couple of hundred, maybe over 1,000 frequencies that are available out there across the spectrum of the FM line, for example. In this day, or in this way, should I say, by going digital, space is freed by using digital pockets for data rather than actual radio waves. So, what does this mean that we can actually go ahead and do? We can start to use the frequency for other priorities that serve our country better, such as wireless broadband, right? And so we can actually bring down those costs completely, which is what other countries have already at this point. And it's not because they're better countries than us, just because they have started this entire process and have, in terms of us, are better in terms of the infrastructures, right? That are able to move towards these DAB kind of lives and then use, like I say, this wireless broadband where data, internet, or data is not even a concern. It's more about subscription fees, etc. Introducing more radio stations for variety and competition. We wanna, okay, so we call this is called digital dividend, as using digital packets of data frees up the space on the frequency spectrum. So DAB, so we just imagine these digital packets as being quite, obviously evenly compartmentalized or divided, and that's how and there's not a new concept. So in the way that, for example, a computer to the internet, right? So internet's just transmission. We work in data packets, right? All right, and data is packeted in quite complex ways, right? And then that's how you receive. When you go and let's say do a request on you go and say Google, I want to type google.com, and then between obviously servers and clients, etc., that comes out. Anyway, let me not go into a totally different subject area. But so yeah, altogether, DAB receiver looks like a modern radio set with an interactive liquid LCD, so display screen, quite like your phone, right? Where further information about the station, show music being played, so the metadata that's involved in there, news stories, so data about the news stories being delivered can be actually found. So we have again, almost picture your phone within your uh, uh, car, for example, right? As the the interface to the device, right? However, what this means for South Africa is that they would need to replace current radio sets with DAB receivers. And remember, we have an obligation to the South African population. I'm saying radio has an obligation to, informing the entire country, right, in any one of their languages, right, of information that is important to that particular person at any one given time. In other words, what I'm trying to say is that everyone has to have a DAB receiver, otherwise it's not really fair, right? Okay, they could be missing out on information. Should we do away, which is not what happens. I'm saying AM and FM frequencies and systems, shall I say, AM, FM systems will parallel implementation of DAB systems for quite a long time, especially in a place like South Africa. All right, although FM does experience interfaces from weather, hills, and mountains, as well as other topography, buildings such as those found in built-up areas, it does work very well in rural areas where there are minimal types of interfaces too. Just quickly considering moving over to satellite broadcasting, right? So yes, DSTV, but we also saw I say the domination of satellite broadcasting or satellite radio broadcasting by Sirius XM in the States, right? So that was launched or pioneered by Howard Stern, and then it's grown into some other kind of beast. Like you should actually go have a look at it. Our last consideration in terms of signal distribution is obviously looking at satellite, right? So again, as I mentioned before, DSTV here is considered quote unquote satellite transition, right? Yeah, transition broadcasting, man. Satellite technology receives an audio signal in waves from the ground and then obviously orbits the Earth, translate that signal into a digital packet, and then we get that on our decoder, right? So negotiations between radio stations have, like for example, like SABC and Prime Media in South Africa, and satellite broadcasts like MultiChoice have enabled millions of South Africans to obtain access to stations that are not able to be picked up within our feeder area, but are around the country. So you would obviously understand the station, not every station is available, for example, on DSTV and MultiChoice's DSTV. These stations must obviously pay, to belong to that bouquet, right? Just like any other of the music services that you do find on DSTV as well. However, satellite distribution has its disadvantages, which include the following: adverse weather conditions between the ground and the satellite that is obviously orbiting the Earth, and then the satellite decoder must remain plugged into an electrical supply in order for it to function. I mean, if you've got DSTV in your home, I've seen this with my parents a lot. There's a lot of troubleshooting that does happen because of, I'm saying, the actual decoder and then the semantics around obviously how the decoder receives its transmission digitally. And there are a lot of hiccups, right? But there's not enough to now call it like an undependable, right? Um, I'm gonna say a medium, right? Or should I say device, whatever it may be, right? Medium space. Uh, to add two things together there. So let's look at some maintenance and security. For almost all studios contain permanent fault logbooks, where any faults that are discovered by the on-air presenters and producer teams can be logged in and dated so that the engineers and the tech, obviously, department can take care of what needs to be taken care of. So, for example, you can look at the physical aspects like loose knobs on the desk, squeaky doors, broken chairs, software faults. Everything needs to be reported, right, so that it can be obviously logged, and then the that particular what I'm going to say, not entry, it's what do we call it, man? Almost like a ticket, like so in the computer space we'd call it a ticket, right? A ticket is produced, and then making sure that we can track the ticket and its obviously completion, right? With accountable people, resources, revenue, not revenue, obviously expense, etc., right? And then, is it resolved or not? The technical producer or studio engineers are responsible for developing these policies that the station has to adhere to. When I say the station, we're talking about the people that obviously operate within the studios and with any and all of the other equipment that you'll find across the station as well. Right, enforcing standards that you can be held accountable for, right? So that's why we have no eating, no drinking allowed in studio, any studio, please. Right, I mean, if you spill any water, right, let's just any liquid onto a desk, uh, you can have a very, very, very expensive outcome there. And again, I don't know exact details, but I mean, because this costs up into the millions, right? Good, obviously, like newer desks, right? If you're going to run an entire desk, obviously you'll be fined. I mean, it goes without saying, right? But because these are rules, you are allowed to actually have a bottle of water that obviously has a closed cap that you can keep on the floor because we are presenters and we do need to wet our throats, right? To keep that kind of like slickness instead of a dry and that kind of like that's gulping and that swallowing and whatever it is. If we are feeling dehydrated or nervous or whatever it is, a lot of people have different like nuances, so physical nuances, whatever it may be. Okay, so no chewing gum or popcorn is allowed. So popcorn's very specific. That's yeah, right. In the studio or the green room area at all. Okay. We're nearly done here. Most studios are protected by doors that are fireproof, soundproof, definitely, as you know, as you've seen in the, just we need soundproofing anywhere. We have spoken about that in previous lessons as well. Fingerprint access, maybe, card access, definitely is something that's for every station, right? So entry to the station or entry to the studio. Okay. Normally you find also that kind of like bank setup, when you have to walk into um, the one door, it must close, and then the other door will open for you. You find that as well. Um, Most studios also use closed circuit television, CCTV, and cameras to ensure that we can actually track the people that might come in for stealing, theft, right, or damage. In addition to this, most broadcasting businesses have strict security protocol when gaining access to the building before reaching studio. Wi-Fi passwords required for logins for obviously, let's say, computer logins. You're gonna have to build accounts. You build email addresses. Those obviously are logged into as well. We have to protect our station in all aspects. Okay, in all areas as well. Okay. All right. So summary is over there. I want to look quickly. Let me look at 7C. Popping over. Give me a second here. 7C. Oof, oof. On the page, yeah. On 7A, 7A, 7B, and I've got 7E coming up on page. Here we are. We're on page 285. Okay, so activity. So because we're not obviously in class, activity 7C is on page 285. I'm just gonna so you can see that over there. Excuse me, I should have included it. Otherwise, it wouldn't have taken so far. Page 285. All right. Okay. And then number one, question one says provide a definition for each of the following terms. So DAB, satellite distribution, topography, FM, digital dividend, right? In turn, internet speed, and then ISP. Right. So internet service provider, right? Two is discuss the advantages of traditional radio station creating of a traditional radio station creating podcasts. And then number three, which is the one here, as the technical producer at XFM, you must prepare for an OB taking place at a political press conference. XFM's program manager wants to broadcast during the press conference and conduct interviews with key politicians after the press conference. The 9 to 12 show consists of a presenter, a news and a traffic reader, a sports presenter, and one producer who also participates on the show. So, an on air producer, right, and contributes. Create an equipment checklist for the outside broadcast, and there's a little table there that you have to go and fill in. Have a great week ahead. You learned something cool, and I will see you in class next.